Alright, and welcome back, everyone. We're going to be talking about more Rexel Jet characters now and my AU plans for them. Now, we've talked about characters that are bright and sunny and happy, and some that are just arrogant or even just mean or miserable. But what if I told you that these four are actually kind of sad? What do I mean by that? I'm going to get into that. The working life of a locomotive, as well as other forms of transport, is finite. However, it soon becomes more beneficial to replace an engine with a more modern design than continue and repair and upgrade the already existing one. And when this happens, an engine will typically get scrapped, aside from a lucky few who may be preserved instead. However, the 1960s saw an introduction of a modernization plan, meaning if it was more beneficial to keep the older steam engines around, they had to be replaced by diesel engines before a certain date. Stepney's book begins with a conversation between Percy and Douglas, with Percy explaining this situation to Douglas, whilst we see an infamous picture on the opposite page. Some old, decrepit engines are sitting on some sidings, looking in horror at a man with a blowtorch, ready to cut them up. This illustration is one of the most harrowing illustrations in the entire railway series, and it makes you wonder how these engines' lives would have played back when they were operational. Rexel Jet did his own take on these four, and I don't see why I can't do my own. So, let's go. Let's go with this, everyone. So here's Cecilia. Cecilia is the engine that's closest to the viewer, and she's probably the only engine in the illustration that looks like something specific. The smokebox design looks very similar to engines designed by Harry Wainwright for the Southeastern and Chatham Railway. And in the end, Rexel Jet went with the C-Class, an 060 tender engine built primarily for hauling freight trains. Now with these engines, he wanted to stick primarily with engines that were withdrawn from service as part of the modernization plan. And while some of these engines were withdrawn, some were kept around as departmental shunters at Ashford Works, which allowed one member of the class, number 39512, to be preserved on the Bluebell Railway. Now then, let me get into Cecilia's character. Cecilia is a kind sort of engine, and she was often looked down by the larger, faster engines in her shed, who were 440s, because they considered the trains she pulled to be unglamorous or even vulgar. Cecilia didn't mind, however. Someone had to pull them, and while she occasionally suggests that the fast passenger engines can pull her goods trains from time to time, for some reason, none of them had actually taken her up on the offer. Now then, the Southeastern and Chatham didn't name their engines, so her name would have been used by herself as well as the engine staff that worked with her. And as the years went by, Cecilia and the other engines in her shed were replaced by larger, boxier-shaped engines that did their work better than they ever did, causing her to be sent to the scrapyard. Now, here's my headcanon for her. She gets saved by the Fat Controller, and she becomes a member of Edward's branch line. You can see her up there with Edward, Boko, Bill, Ben, and Salty, and everyone else. She could get a little ticked off when some people mistake her for an A12, because she and Donald and Douglas almost look alike, just with some slight differences. And one day, when Edward he decided to give Cecilia a change. He gave her a passenger train to pull, and while he took her slow goods. Cecilia was thankful for this. She was never given a passenger train before, and she felt why everyone liked pulling them. So that's Cecilia for you. Now here's Basildon, and he is the engine that had already started to be dismantled, and Rexeljet was kind of concerned on his wheel configuration, because it was difficult for him to tell at a glance that the front set of wheels were a leading axle or part of the driving wheels. Meaning that this engine would have probably been an 062 or a 242 in service, depending on how you interpret the front set of wheels. And he went with an 062, and in the end he settled on a very nice engine class, the London, Tilbury and N Railway Class 69. More specifically, he's based on the Midland Railway rebuild of this class, where they were modified to have Midland-style smokebox and chimneys. One thing to note about this engine class is that they have front sandboxes. And if you remember when he did Percy's Mainland Buddies, you may remember that he struggled to find a class of 242 tanks with front sandboxes. He nearly considered making this engine one of the characters there. Yes, believe it or not, Basildon here was the original concept for Horace. And I can only assume he changed Horace's basis when he realized that there was no side rods connected to his front set of wheels. Anyways, let me get on to Basildon now. So, Basildon is an engine that likes to go fast, and let me tell you this. I was interested on this, and then I thought for a while, wait a minute. A red steam engine, and he likes going fast. That's just James. Well, I guess in this case, sometimes Basildon learns to go a little slower when he's coming to like a sharp corner or something. Let me get back to his character. So, Basildon likes going fast, like I said. And he's always looking. Now, one more thing. In contrast to the Southeastern and Chatham, the London, Tilbury and N Railway named the vast majority of its engines, though they lost their names following the merger with the Midland Railway. And he went with Basildon, so he is always looking for fast trains to pull, and often pawning off his jobs with someone just to make sure they get the job they want. In contrast to Cecilia's slow goods trains, Basildon likes going fast. Let's keep that in mind. And what interested him is his withdrawal date. And he came to the conclusion that Basildon must have evaded the cutter's torch once, but couldn't hide forever. For once, they weren't fast enough. Dun, dun, dun. Now then, in my AU, Basildon works on a main line and hauling mixed traffic trains. It's whether it be perishable goods or just standard goods, or even sometimes the passenger trade. He is incredibly grateful to have not been cut up and have been fully restored. And can finally call Sodor his home. Now then, these next two are my personal favorites, and oh boy, believe me when I say that these two have the saddest story of them all. Buck and Jumper. I'm pretty sure they're everyone's favorite. Okay, let's get into this. As well as the two of them, we see two other engines languishing in the sidings. One of them even has their smokebox door missing. And these two engines seem to share some similarities to one another, so it's not possible to assume that they could both be members of the same class. And in the end, Rexeljet decided to base these two on the 060 tank engines for the Great Eastern Railway. Buck is the older of the two, originally being an R24 or S or J67 class. He was later rebuilt into the class S56 or J69. Jumper is of the slightly newer C72 design, with some slight differences, notably the larger funnel, notably the different funnel and larger cab with arch-shaped windows. Huck acted and as a good friend and mentor towards Jumper, but was also cautious about being seen as a boring old fuddy-duddy. The two of them became virtually inseparable from one another, and neither of them wanted to leave the other, so neither of them were relocated, and both of them stayed in the big city in London. As large, big deals started to replace them. It was a time of fear and uncertainty for Buck and Jumper. Eventually, the day came where Jumper was withdrawn from service. Buck was heartbroken and insisted that if the scrap man was going to take Jumper, then they'd have to take him as well. The two engines were taken onto a set of sidings and scrapped as they lived together. You see why people like these guys the most? They have the saddest story of them all. They died doing what they loved. Being together. Now, onto my headcanon for them. When Sir Topham Hatt sees them and decides to buy Buck, he insists that he'll only go if he buys Jumper as well. Sir Topham Hatt was a little skeptical at first, but figured, why not? And so he brought them back to Sodor, along with Cecilia and Basildon, and his job for them was to make them Knapford station pilots along with Percy. You can see them arranging passenger trains and even trucks for other engines. Buck and Jumper are incredibly grateful to have both been saved and lived together on the island of Sodor, making new friends and having lots of fun together, as good friends should be. Virtually inseparable these are. And those are my headcanons for the scrap engines. It's a great shame what happened to them, but we can only imagine the type of lives these engines would have lived back when they were in steam and pulling trains. Whilst it's always important to look towards the future, it's also good to look back at the good times of the past. But in the end, what do you think of my headcanon for these guys, for the scrap engines? Do you agree with some of these, or do you have your own personal takes? I'll see you all for my next one. Bye.